second point is, while these huge deficit numbers that we see include that shortfall that's based on tax cuts in the past, the major reason why we're in the pickle that we're in today is because of a global economic recession that started with a gigantic housing boom that blew up in 2005 through 2007. The third point is that policymakers had to figure out what to do to get out of the situation, and one way they've been doing it, in addition to a lot of gimmicks and borrowing, is by making real cuts to programs at the state level, filtering down to the local level, and health programs have been among the programs that have been cut. That's even prior to the July 20th deal that was in, I'm calling it the July 20th deal, the deal they announced on Monday. And the last point is that these program cuts are going to be difficult to reverse quickly. Anytime soon. Anytime in the next, certainly not next year, anytime in the next 2, 3, 4, or potentially 5 years. So those are sort of my big points, but now that you know them, don't leave the room, please, because I would like to walk you through a few slides here. So let's just look at this first point. This is franchise. You should have these handouts in your packets if you want to follow along. We've been collecting from the Franchise Tax Board information on the cost of state tax cuts enacted by the legislature since 1993. This is the annual cost of tax cuts, right? Everybody loves getting tax cuts, or at least most of us probably do, but they have a cost. It's like going into your boss at the beginning of the year and saying, you know what, I think I'm making too much money. Even though I know my expenses are going to go up this year, why don't you give me a 10? No, give me a 20% cut in my pay this year. Essentially, that's what the state does when it goes before the voters and says, we want to lower your taxes, because that reduces the amount of money going into the state treasury, which is the only thing the state has really to pay for programs and services. When you add up the cost of these tax cuts over time, the cumulative impact, you go to the last bar on this chart on the far right-hand side, drops down a little because of the economic downturn. But in 2008-09, according to the state itself, the Treasury lost about $12 billion in that single fiscal year as a result of all of the tax cuts that had been enacted since 1993. That's the cumulative annual impact. Can anyone think of the biggest tax cut that would be in there? I'll give you a hint. Sledgehammers and vehicles. The car tax. The vehicle license fee rolled back by Governor Schwarzenegger as his first act in office in 2003. And in a second, we'll get to why that tax cut becomes a problem for the general fund. But essentially, this is looking at general fund tax cuts, the corporate tax, the personal income tax, sales tax. Those are the main drivers of the general fund. Now, interesting thing about this chart, this shows what other states do in terms of votes in the legislature for budgets and tax increases. California is the darkest piece of this map because that indicates we're the only state of the union that requires supermajority votes to pass a budget out of the legislature and to pass any tax increase out of the legislature. There are a couple other states that do 2/3 on budgets. There are a few other states, including most of our neighbors, that do 2/3 on taxes. But we are a universe of one, and that we're the only state that ties its hands behind its back, both in terms of getting a budget out and getting taxes out of the legislature. That makes it very difficult for legislators to do their job. So it's not just enough to say, oh, they're not doing their jobs, throw the bums out, because the next set of bums that you send to Sacramento are going to have, not that I'm not implying that legislators are bums, but they'll have the same obstacles in their path as the current crop of legislators has today in their path. This double 2/3 requirement becomes a problem because how do you get a budget out? If you don't have 2/3 as the majority party, you need to bargain with the minority. In order to get things out of the minority, you might have to give up some things on the tax side. They might ask for some tax cuts in order to give you the numbers you need on the budget side to get a budget out. The other funny thing about it is that while it takes a 2/3 vote to raise a tax, it only takes a majority to cut a tax. So you can decide one year, we're rolling in dough, let's give some back to the good taxpayers of California, let's give a whopping tax rebate. Well, you can't reverse that in the good time. When the good times go away and the bad times inevitably come, you need a 2/3 vote to reverse the tax cut that you provided 2, 3, 4, or 5 years before when economic times were much better. So once you set tax cuts into the tax code, it becomes very difficult to roll them back because by definition it becomes a tax increase and you have to get the minority party to go along with you. And in California politics, we know for the last several decades the minority party has been the Republican Party, and that party basically subscribes to the idea that all taxes under all circumstances are a very bad thing, and we must never bring ourselves to vote for them. That's essentially the political philosophy. So you would think, though, that when times get really bad, our legislators would learn the first rule of holes, or remember the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. If you already are in a hole, put the shovel down and stop digging yourself deeper in. Instead, at the end of last year, when they passed the 2008-09 Budget Act, and in February, when they passed the first version of the 2009-10 Budget Act, right now we're in the 2009-10 fiscal year, they enacted whopping tax cuts that will benefit a very small number of very large, wealthy corporations. And this chart shows you that over time, those tax cuts are going to add up to about $2 billion per year. In other words, state legislators, in order to get budgets out, and because they like to give tax cuts anyway, decided over the last 2 budget cycles, even though we're in the deepest economic downturn since the Great Depression, that major multinational corporations doing business in California needed tax cuts, and the cost of those tax cuts, as you can see leading to the far right of the chart, is $2 billion per year. The bars are going down because that's negative territory. Right? That's money that's not coming into the state treasury that otherwise would. So you ask yourself, at a time when we're cutting Medi-Cal, healthy families, public education, is this the time we want to be giving out large tax increases to major multinational corporations? It's a question you have got to pose to policymakers in California. I don't have enough time to go through this chart on the vehicle license fee. If you're really interested, you can read it later. It kind of lays out how it works. The basic idea is voters got to have our tax cut, and it didn't cost us anything because we got to pay less every year when we register our car through the vehicle license fee, right? We got a big cut. So you would think, well, you get a cut. That must mean services are going to get reduced somewhere because if there's less money, that must mean that government can provide fewer services. Wrong. Because vehicle license fee money goes right to cities and counties, basically to do the things that cities and counties do. The state said, don't worry, guys, we'll make it up to you. From where? Out of the general fund. Oh, so we get a tax cut on the vehicle license fee side, and we shift the $4, $5, $6 billion per year cost over to the general fund, and it becomes the largest new spending program on the general fund side of the budget. So when you hear people talking about how general fund spending has exploded in the last few years, the biggest single cost is the state making up for the fact that we cut the vehicle license fee by 2/3, and we lost that money and decided we didn't want to say to cities and counties, eat it. You figure out where to make the cuts because we decided to give California car owners a vehicle license fee cut. That's the way that worked. We have an intern in our office right now, really nice guy, he's 19 years old. You gotta love young people because they're so enthusiastic, they believe that you can do good in the world and you can make change. They're not cynical yet. He walks around the office every day saying, what if we do this? I don't understand, why are they doing this? And I said to him, you know what? Just throw all logic and reason out the window. As soon as you accept that there's no logic, no rationality, no reasoning behind any of this, you will really be in a much better position because after 7 years of looking at this, that's what I learned to do. I gave up that way of thinking 7 years ago. Tonya knew me before I got all cynical like I am now. But anyway, that's what you have to do. Just throw all that out the window. There's no logic behind it. It's a series of inconsistencies and incomprehensions, one built on top of another. We have a giant Rube Goldberg mechanism as a way of getting a state budget out. And as you can see, it doesn't work. The system is broken.